Hello out there, welcome, and this time around we're going to look at some task features. First some minor extra stuff, but then we will create a task and update a task estimate. So I have some of this feature, just the service layer, and then we will do this one to see how we're going to do it from, scratch, I guess, from top to bottom or whatever you want to call it. I don't have anything or very little that supports this one. So first, we just look at that generic data access object I mentioned at the in the previous video. And I had this set up here, and there was the thing that the methods here had to match the methods over here. So if I renamed find to get or read, then it would fall apart. And I mentioned that I could have a generic interface which could be implemented over here, and then that would put that constraint on so that we could make sure all methods would match. And yep, that's where we start. So we swap to IntelliJ and I just have it open. So just an overview, I have an interface called data access object, or DAO. It can work with objects of type T, so that's the generic type, but they must implement the entity interface. So remember, we created this one because then all my entities were guaranteed to have a getID method. And then we can create and find and update and delete. And it looks the same no matter which kind of entity, whether it's a project or task or user, whatever. Then I have my specific entities. So user DAO, which extends the DAO interface and then provides the unique methods for the user DAO. So in this case, user find by username, and the task DAO provides the unique methods for this one. Currently there are none. Eventually I think, that's on the subtask. So I don't know if there will be any, but I still want to define a specific interface just to be consistent, so that I don't sometimes work with a DAO of type with a generic type of type task. But I have this explicit one, because then I can implement this in my task Postgres DAO and still have to include these. So I want the specific interfaces. That makes it easier. And then in my generic mock DAO that works with T, now implements my generic interface. So in this way, the create method must exist in the generic mock, and it must also exist in the specific ones, user mock DAO. And I can now guarantee that I cannot rename it to read. I could create another read method over here if I wanted to, but that's just messing it up. Okay, so that's the generic DAO. Okay, next up I have created a real client. It's just a main method that creates a connection to the server and send a request and read response, and then we print out the response. And I'm creating a new user, so it's super simple, but it's just to show you that the server actually works. So let's just have a look. All right, I'll just close these. Yep, so I have my run server. Now there's actually a main method to run my server. I didn't have that before. I create the actual user Postgres DAO. I create a user service. I hand that over to a new request handler, and then I start a new socket server with that request handler. So my main method is where I create new instances of every kind of object, all the DAOs, all the services, and that kind of stuff. That all happens in the main method. So that gives me that dependency inversion, because none of these implementations know anything other than just an interface. And then it's actually used Postgres DAO, but we don't know that. So the socket server, when we start that, we've seen this before. It doesn't do much. It accepts the client, creates a request receiver, starts that in a new thread. And this one just reads an object and hands it over to the request handler, and then sends a response back again. So if I start my server, there we go. Then we can look at the client. In the meantime, just the main method doesn't do anything. I instantiate a new socket, so that means I create a connection to the local host with this port. That's my server. Create an object output stream. I create the request. So I'm trying to create a new user with username and password. We wrap that in the request object with the action and send that to the server. Then we read the response and get the actual payload out of that response. I know it's going to be an ID and print that out. So, and let's just verify that I don't have anything in my database, so we can see that I actually get some new stuff put in. So here's my data grip. There's nothing in the user table, and that's nice. Then we run this. We print out an ID, 94FD, and refresh, 94FD. So my user is inserted into the database. So my server does actually work. And as mentioned, I don't have to modify neither the, well, this server might, I don't know if it needs other objects. Maybe the request handler is enough. The request receiver, that's going to just stay like this most likely. So that's why we can just drive the tests from the request handler instead. Okay. Then we're going to look at the next feature. So that's creating a new task. And I've created a little bit of a work breakdown structure so we can see what we are supposed to do. Right, so create task, what is involved in completing this feature. And I have 4 different areas: the network layer, my server, my service layers, my data access object layer, and my database. And we're going to need to modify most of these one way or another. So for the network layer, we're going to write an acceptance test, and I'll need a new data transfer object. Those are the request objects, the payloads. And I need to update the request handler to manage this new request, this new action. For the service layer, we need to implement a method in the task service. And there must be an interface method for creating a task and an implementation and some test for this. And we've done this previously, so this is actually given to us. For the data access object layer, I need the interface method, which I have because we needed this previously. And then we need some test for this one against the actual database and the real class. So for the task Postgres DAO, and then the create method in this one. Now, because we're implementing the interface, I will have the other methods as well, but they will just be left empty for now, and then we might need them in the next feature. And for the database, we're going to need a new table. So this is a rough overview of the task that we're going to do, and it should probably be done in something like this order. So ideally we would write the acceptance test first. Again, these are the ones that call methods on the, or send request objects to the request handler. I call that acceptance test because when that is working as expected, then the entire feature on the server is working. And ideally we would write this first, but we're going to need to instantiate task service and task DAO and some the payload objects, the request objects, create task request and update the request handler. So some of these, to write this, I'm going to have to modify a bunch of classes. So I might just wait with this one and write it later on, because it will not initially compile unless I do a bunch of stuff, and that might just interfere with things. So this is finished already from previously, and I have the interface method and the actual interface itself. So the approach is, this is my server with the database, and We're going to do this first, which I have, but this is the general approach. I want to focus on the business logic first to get that in place. So for the next feature, this is what we'll do. And then we might do the data access object interfaces, but I think I have sort of a plan of combining this one. So when I test this, I'm going to test it through here. We'll see how that goes. And then when this is working, well, I need the table at some point also. Then we're going to sort of test this in Unison. And hang on. Let's try again. Sorry. There we go. I just extended these because I'm using the actual test database, so not a dummy. That's the idea. I used the mock with this one. Okay, let's give it a go. So I do have that test for task service test, and let's just run it, see the overview of the test methods. So I can create a task with a valid string or title. I can give an invalid title, it fails. So I have my logic in place, and then there's something about updating an existing title. But these two here shows that I do have the functionality of creating new task, where we just validate the title and save it. So similar to the user, I think I want to rework this a little bit. When we create a new user, this is returned. Create, we return the ID, and that's pretty convenient. So yeah, ID, and then down here at the end we just return it, return ID, and that means I have to return a GUID, yep, and then also for the interface, there, return a UID. Okay, just a minor change. And then, well, we want to work on the data access. So I have the service layer, right? This one, I have that. Then we're going for this one, and as mentioned, I'm probably going to stretch it like this. But let's just start here. So I'm going to need the database, a new table, and for now, let's see, version 3. I need a create table task, and it contains an ID of type UUID, and it contains we call it title of varchar. Again, no length, and this one here is the primary key. Remember it this time. Right, so the title constraints are checked in the logic layer, so I don't want to put whatever here. And that should be it for the task. Obviously, I'm going to need further attributes later, but not now. So I first need to set the schema to be the test. Yeah, whichever connection. And now we are working against the BSA test, and we create a task, and we should be able to see here task with 2 columns, so that looks okay. Then we want to do the task DAO implementation, and I'm going to try something slightly different. Task service tests. We have a task, so instead I'm creating a new class here and say task service create task service create task test. Right, so I'm testing the task service, the create task functionality. So I want to split it out and say this one here So this test is currently testing, both the update title and the create. So these two here and the setup is just copy. And I always need this assertion stuff, so I can use those methods. And then I'm going to remove these two from over here. And should create task, should fail. Let's just give it a go. Okay, so that still works. I've just split out my tests. So that's because I want to dimension, try something. No, I still need that. Try something different. And let's see. I want to say, because I want to do this. If I need to test my DAO interfaces, I might as well just reuse these tests, and then I could say here a task instead of the mock. I could use the actual thing, but I also still want to keep this one, so I have a difference. I have a set of tests that test against the mock, and I have a set of tests that test my logic with the real thing. And I think we can do that by keeping the test methods in a superclass and make these protected. And then the setup where I actually define this, that goes into a subclass. So let's try and do this. Public static, it apparently has to be static, with mock DAO. It's a class. And this one goes in here. And it extends task service create task test like that. Okay. I could put this in a separate file, separate class, but it's so little I just want to keep it in here. And you can see now I can run this. And because I inherit from this one, I also inherit all the tests, so this should still work. Okay. So then I can make a different one. Public static class with Postgres DAO extends task service create task. Yeah, this one. And here instead we want to say this one is a new what would we call these, task Postgres DAO. And I'm going to need the data base util test this one, yeah. So first we need the URI, then we need the username, and then we need the password. And that's how we also set it up in the other tests. So where we have that up here, right. Set it up like this. And I don't know when to call this. It seems like just once when the program starts, but I feel like I'm starting these tests, that's a new program I start every time. So we'll just do like this just to be safe at exceptions. Okay. And this one I don't have the class. But when I run this one, I would run the same tests. So I might have to rework them because this method should not be this now has to be a task DAO so that it can be shared, and I don't have this one, but instead we can rewrite the test because now I get the ID and I can use the functionality that we have, find ID, and that fails. Okay, so let the minor rework. Let's just make sure that I didn't break anything, so I can still run this with my mock. Still works. So that's good. And this one I need a class, and we put it up here. Yeah, and it implements the task DAO like that. And I think I'll just going to compare. So I need a constructor. Yeah. We'll do it like this. Where did it go here? Username, password, that's the same. We just have to update the name. So this indicates that I might have an abstract Postgres DAO. I could have that just to keep this in the same, it's going to be the same for all of them. They all need to connect to the same thing. Alternatively, I could have a separate class, a singleton, say Postgres connection manager or whatever. So maybe I'll fix that at some point. Okay, now we need to import it. And if I run this, obviously it will fail because I don't have any code. So yeah, this one succeeds because we don't get to the data access layer, but these I should be able to insert or create a task and then find the task. But we cannot do that because I don't have any of the methods. So that actually means I'm going to need both of these. So first the create, just copy this, get connection. Again, you can see I'm copying a bunch of code here, which indicates that maybe that should be combined into one Postgres connection manager. So it's a task, and we insert into here. I don't need those anymore because task is not a reserved keyword, and I just need an ID and a title. So the first one, yeah, and then task.get title, and then I don't need this one. So that should be it for inserting stuff. And then I need to find stuff. So just do something similar, and then rearrange. Oh, that was an update I stole. Find, update, find. Let's do that one instead. So get the connection, we select from the task where the ID is the same. Yeah, prepared statement. Yes, then we result and we get the next. And first we get the ID and then we get the title column. So retrieved title. And then I'm going to create a new task with retrieved title. Okay. And I think that should probably be it. So let's just verify. I don't have anything in here. Yeah. And if I run this again, then it works. And let's just open data grip. And I actually have 2 in here, so that makes sense because I give it 2. Okay, so my data access object, the real one, actually works, and I share the tests, so that's convenient. I don't have to duplicate them. So that is both a convenient thing, but it's also I find a bunch of comments saying that maybe it's not recommended because now I have 2 sets of tests which are sort of testing different things, but they are now pretty tightly connected, because if I change one test so that it matches this one, then the other version might fail. But for this, I think it's good enough. Rename. Okay, it wants lowercase DAO anyway. So I'll accept that risk of the tight coupling. The last thing I need is to say before each, and then Postgres before each. Yes, I need something like this. Database util. Yeah. Public void clean, to be consistent, cleanup database, and database util clear task table. I have that. And just throw the exception. Does it do anything? clear table task? Probably. Let's give it a go. So I should still just have one, perhaps. Let's see. Before each, because then before the failures, then it's cleaned out. So that works. I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. So if I had a bunch of tests, I would obviously save a lot more time by just doing this and say we'll just reuse them. So I might do something similar for the next feature. All right, so how far are we? I have this one in place now. I just need the network, the acceptance test. So let's write this and here, and server acceptance tests for task. Oh, yeah. And probably need some inspiration from this one. What are we doing? I need this one as always. And I need these two as field variables so that I can find stuff. I need this. Here we will clear clear task table, yeah. And the user DAO, obviously this is a task DAO of type task DAO here. Task DAO and import it. And we need a task service. Task service simple with this one. And import stuff. And then the request handler. So this one, let's just rename it task service. Now it needs a user service and then a task service, so it's going to need all my services unless I sort of put my services into a service manager or something like that. But for now, let's do it like this. And so I don't want to modify existing code before I have a failing unit test, I think. So let's just say test public void should create task with valid title and store in database. Okay. So we have the usual range act assert, and this is essentially the same thing. So we create a string request type. That would be task create. We create a create task request, and that's my payload. New create task request with a title as a user, blah, blah, blah. And then we request object new, and the type, yeah, request type, payload. Okay, so that's the object I want to send from the client to the server when I need to create a new task. So the act part is to tell the request handler to handle my request object, and this should return to me response object, and I should get back an ID of the created task. Response object it's not actually a response object. What do I get? I get an object back. Yeah, okay, it's just because I also have this response object. So this is my response payload actually, just to be specific. And this would be wrapped if I find my this one request receiver. So response payload, that's what I get back, and it's wrapped into a response object, but with a status also. So response payload, yeah, and I need to import the ID and created task ID. Yeah, and then the assert would be to say task DAO find by the created task ID, and that's a task. And then we assert, and we say assert, what do we say? We assert the title. So this one I need to compare actual title, and we say actual title, and whatever we got back here, get title, like this. So if this works, I can create my request, then we send it to the server, so to say. It's handled and I get the ID of the created object. I pull that out of the database, and then we check that it's the same that I tried to create. So now I have a failing unit test. That's nice. Then we can start fixing things. First, this must be updated. I need to provide a second argument, like that. Yeah, refactor. So I did actually have that. Yeah, DAO layer. Okay, so these two are the parts that I'm working with. Okay, anyway. So that works. Let's just make everything compile first. So I need to create task request. In my request object, let's just put some organization into this user. And we say task. And here I want a new class. And it implements serializable. And what does it need? It needs a private title, only a title, yeah. And we create that, and we create a getter. Okay, so we import that, that's good. And this then compiles. I just wanted to reorganize this, so we say create, everything user related goes in there. And then I have my two container objects to send stuff back and forth. So might as well try and run it just to see that it fails. Cannot find simple. Oh yeah, okay. So now my run server, my main method to start the server, it needs a task service. So I have my user service, and I need first a task DAO, import it, new, that one, and like that. Yeah, then we need a task service. Nope. Task service impl. Yeah, and it takes the DAO, and then my request handler can get this. So, instantiate by layers, and the service layer, data access sublayer, service layer, and then data access layer, service layer, network layer. Let's just build everything again. And then that is the yeah, okay, so I'm using the request handler a bunch of places, but this one doesn't need it because that's the user stuff. Yeah. So every time I add a new service to the request handler, I'm going to have to update all of my tests because I'm giving it another service. So then I add the project service and everything breaks again. Eventually I'll tire of that. So maybe I do need that service manager to put everything in. Then I don't have to update the request handler. We'll see how that goes at some point. I'm still, yeah, this one. Everything compiles now, so that's a good start. Let's run it. User with ID not found. Okay, so obviously I still have the task, yeah, task with ID not found. Select from task where the ID is this. So it happens here. Trying to create something. Yeah, okay, so obviously this fails because I haven't modified my request handler. So let's go ahead and do that. So task, that's the prefix. We are sending in task/create. Okay, but then I should probably go here and say default. I have that. And my handle task actions does nothing. So we'll do something similar. Copy paste stuff, action. Create, I don't need this, and create task request, create task request, and from that's the payload, so we cast that, and then we say return task service, and I don't have that as a field variable, so let's just create it, yeah. Then we say create with request title, and I can see it tells this is the user story, so I don't like that. So let's just here title, and because then it says you should give it a title. Okay. Let's try again. And then it works. And maybe, yeah, so I get my user in here. So that's nice. So my acceptance test works, and my feature of creating new task also works from the request handler. But as we talked about, mostly me, I guess, the request receiver is not going to change, so it will handle all requests the same way, so I don't need to modify this every time. So this is just the one that must be fixed. And maybe these are going to grow large, and this class is going to grow very large, so I might think about creating a user request handler which contains this method, and then a task request handler which contains this method as they grow larger. So we'll see. I think that's enough for this video, and then maybe we'll postpone the update estimate to a future video. Yes. Thank you for watching.